There is a moment right before dawn when the night feels the heaviest, when the water is up to your chin and rising, when you pray until your voice cracks and the sky still say nothing back. You know that moment. Maybe you are in it right now. And I need you to hear this before you scroll away, before you close this tab, before you tell yourself, not today. 2026 is not going to be won by the version of you that keeps folding. It is going to be won by the one who decides in the middle of the flood to stop drowning quietly and start fighting loudly. Because there is a war for your soul happening right now, in this exact second. And most people don't even know they're standing on the battlefield. They think it's just a hard year, just a rough season, just bad luck stacked on bad luck. But some of us know better. Some of us can feel it in our bones. This is not random. This is resistance. And resistance only shows up when something inside you is worth fighting for. So stay with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this, you are not going to see your struggle the same way again. You are going to see it as what it actually is. An invitation to fight for God in a year that is going to demand everything you've got. Let me take you back to a man who knew exactly what it felt like to be swallowed alive by circumstance. Long before he was a king, long before his name was carved into history, he was just a man riding in the dark, describing what it feels like when everything comes crashing in at once. He said it like this: the waves of death wrapped around him, floods of destruction swept over him, and the grave itself reached out with ropes to drag him under. That is not a soft language. That is a man describing the closest thing to dying while still breathing. And here's what gets me every time I read it. He didn't pretty it up. He didn't perform the strength he didn't have. He named the terror exactly as it was. And then, in the middle of that description, something shifts. He says that in his distress, he cried out. Not polite, not with perfect theology. He cried out the way you cry out when you're actually scared, when you actually think this might be the end. And the cry reached heaven. Let that sit with you for a second. His cry reached heaven. Not his composure, not his performance of faith. His raw, desperate, unfiltered cry. That's the God we're talking about tonight. Not a God who needs you to have it together before He'll listen. A God who bends down through the ceiling of the sky the moment your voice breaks. Here's what nobody tells you about fighting for God in a year like this one. It doesn't start with a victory. It starts with admitting you're going under. Too many of us are trying to fight from a place of pretending we're fine. We post the highlight reel. We say, I'm blessed through gritted teeth. And quietly, we're being pulled under by things we haven't told a single soul. Financial pressure that keeps you up at 3 a.m. doing math that never adds up. A relationship that used to feel like home and now feels like a courtroom. A body that won't cooperate no matter how hard you push it. A mind that spins the same dark thought on a loop until you're exhausted just from thinking. That is the water some of you are standing in right now. And I am telling you, the fight for God in 2026 begins the moment you stop faking calm water and start telling the truth about the storm. Because here's the thing about storms. They rule oceans. We don't. There is a truth buried in ancient scripture that says God is the one who commands the raging sea, the one who has authority over crashing, storm-tossed waves. Read that again. Not you, not your bank account, not the diagnosis, not the person who left. God rules the ocean you're drowning in. And if He rules it, He can still your ocean. That doesn't mean the water disappears the second you ask. Sometimes it means He walks you straight through the middle of it. But either way, the waves answer Him, not the other way around. Now I want to take you on a boat. A small, wooden, ordinary boat on an ordinary lake with a group of ordinary men who had just spent the day watching a miracle worker heal the sick and calm the broken. And this miracle worker turns to them and says, let's cross to the other side. It was His idea, His plan, His command. They didn't wander off the path. They followed Him directly into what came next. And what came next was violence. A storm exploded out of nowhere, waves crashing over the sides of the boat, water pouring in, and terror gripping every man on board. Here is the detail that should stop you in your tracks. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were told to do, and the storm hit anyway. Let that dismantle a lie you've been carrying. Being faithful does not mean being exempt. Following God's plan does not come with a guarantee of smooth water. Sometimes the very obedience that pleases Him is the thing that sails you directly into the wind. So, if you're in a storm right now and quietly wondering what you did wrong, stop right there. Some storms are the wreckage of our own choices. Yes, that's real, and we have to own that when it's true. But some storms are not punishments. Some storms are proof that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The disciples weren't drifting outside God's will when the wind tore through that lake. They were dead sinners in it. And I need you to let that truth rewire something in you tonight, because 2026 is going to bring storms that make no sense if you're only measuring your life by how calm the water looks. Calm water was never a promise. The presence in the storm was the promise. Ask yourself something honestly. Think back over your whole life. When did you actually grow up? Was it during the easy stretch, the smooth season, the year nothing went wrong? Or was it in the wreckage, in the diagnosis, the breakup, the financial collapse, the year you thought you might not make it? Almost every person who has lived long enough to look back honestly will tell you the same thing. Growth doesn't happen on calm seas. It happens in the wreckage. A sailor who has never fought a real storm is not a sailor you'd trust with your life. And a faith that has never been tested is not a faith that can carry you through what's coming. If God allows the storm, it is not because He stopped caring. It's because He is building something in you that sunshine alone could never build. Muscles tear before they grow stronger. The ground gets plowed before it produces a harvest. And faith gets tested before it becomes unshakable. That is not cruelty. That is craftsmanship. I want to be honest with you about something most people won't say out loud from a stage. The seasons in my own life where I actually became someone, where I actually changed, where my character actually deepened, were never the comfortable ones. They were the ones that wrecked me. The ones where everything I was leaning on got knocked out from under me, and I had nothing left to hold on to except a whispered prayer in the dark. When things are easy, we quietly start worshiping ourselves. We think we did it. We think we have this. But the second the floor drops outhouse, remember who's actually holding us up. That's not a flaw in the design. That's the entire point of the design. So here's the question I want to put in front of you as we head into 2026, a year that is already showing signs of being loud, chaotic, and relentless for a lot of people. Are you going to fight for God? Or are you going to quietly let the noise of the world convince you to sit this one down? Because that's a real battle. Not whether hard things will come. They will. The real battle is whether you keep showing up to the fight or whether you go numb and call it peace. There is a kind of surrender that looks like faith but is actually exhausted wearing a disguise. And there is a kind of fight that looks aggressive but is actually the deepest form of trust. Because you don't fight for something you've already given up on. Let's talk about what it actually costs to fight for God in a year like this. It costs comfort. It costs an easy path. It costs the version of you that wants to numb out instead of showing up, that wants to scroll instead of praying, that wants to complain instead of contending. Fighting for God in 2026 means choosing to open your eyes at 5 in the morning and talk to Him before you talk to your phone. It means choosing to forgive the person who wronged you, even when your flesh is screaming for revenge. It means choosing to tithe when the math doesn't make sense. Choosing to show up to church when you're exhausted. Choosing to tell the truth when a lie would be so much easier. None of that is passive. None of that is soft. That is warfare disguised as devotion. Here's what I need you to understand about the enemy of your soul. He does not fear your Sunday morning. He fears your Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon when nobody's watching, and you choose obedience anyway. He fears the version of you that fights for God when there's no applause, no audience, no highlight reel. He fears the quiet, consistent, relentless faith that refuses to quit even when the results aren't visible yet. That is the fight. Not a one-time emotional moment. A daily, gritty, unglamorous decision to keep showing up for God even when God feels silent. There was a man named Moses who understood this in a way most of us will never be tested to understand. He was told to lead an entire nation out of slavery into a wilderness toward a promise he had never seen with his own eyes. He had to become someone he had never been. He had to trust a plan he could not verify in front of people who doubted him, mocked him, and threatened to turn back at the first sign of trouble. And at the edge of impossibility, a sea in front of him, an army behind him, nowhere left to run. He did the one thing that made no logical sense. He stretched out his hand. Not because he had a strategy, because he had a word. God had told him deliverance was coming, and he had to stand on that word before he saw a single drop of water move. The sea is split. The impossible became the walkway. But it only happened after the stretch, after the surrender, after the decision to trust a promise before the proof arrived. I want you to sit with that for a second, because most of us want the proof before we stretch out our hands. We want the sea to dry before we take the steps. But that's not how this works. Faith is stretching your hand out over water that hasn't moved yet. Faith is standing on a word you heard in prayer, in scripture, in a whisper in the middle of the night, long before your circumstances agree with it. If you're waiting for everything to make sense before you fight for God in 2026, you're going to be waiting your whole life. The stretch comes first. The sea splits after. There's a piece of ancient wisdom that says, don't lean on your own understanding. Trust with everything in you instead. That verse gets quoted so often, it's almost lost its edge. So let me sharpen it for you. Leaning on your own understanding means trusting what looks logical, what looks safe, what everyone around you is telling you to do. It means following the path that makes sense on paper, even when your spirit is screaming that it's the wrong direction. And here's the brutal truth. You cannot outthink God. You cannot outplan Him. You cannot manage your way into a miracle. At some point, thinking has to stop and trusting has to start. That's not anti-intellectual. That's just honest about the limits of your own understanding when you're standing in front of something only God can move. Think about every person throughout history who fought for God when it made absolutely no sense to. A man thrown into a den of lions for refusing to bow to anything but the truth. 3 men thrown into a furnace for refusing to worship what everyone else worshiped. A woman who risked her life to speak up when silence would have been safer. A man who lost everything he owned and still refused to curse the God who allowed it. None of them had proof before they fought. They made a decision. They chose to trust the character of God even when the circumstances of their life were screaming the opposite. That is the fight, not the absence of fear. The refusal to let fear make your decisions for you. Think about the 2 men chained in a prison cell, backs torn open from being beaten, feet locked in stocks, sitting in the dark in what should have been the lowest moment of their lives. And at midnight, the exact hour when the night is darkest, when hope feels furthest away, they started singing, not quite humming, not a whisper, singing loud enough that the other prisoners heard them. That is not normal human behavior. That is a supernatural act of defiance against despair. That is 2 men looking at their worst circumstance and refusing to let it write the final word. And I want to ask you the same question. Their story asks every person who hears it. Can you sing at midnight? Can you worship when nothing makes sense? Can you praise God when the diagnosis hasn't changed? When the bank account hasn't grown? When the relationship hasn't healed? Because singing at midnight isn't denial. It's the deepest form of surrender there is. Saying, God, I don't understand this. I don't like this, but I trust you more than I trust my own eyes. That's what fighting for God actually looks like in 2026. It's not going to look like constant victory laps. It's going to look like getting knocked down on a Monday and choosing to worship anyway on Tuesday. It's going to look like praying through tears you didn't plan on crying. It's going to look like showing up to serve other people while your own life feels like it's falling apart. because somewhere in the middle of pouring out, you find strength you didn't know you had. It's going to look like refusing to let a bad year convince you that God has gone quiet, when really He's just working in a way you can't see yet. So here's what I want you to carry out of this. Whatever storm you are standing in right now, whatever wave is currently over your head, it does not disqualify you from the promise. It does not mean you took the wrong turn. It might mean the opposite. It might mean you are exactly where obedience placed you, in the exact storm that is going to build the exact strength you're going to need for what's coming next. So don't waste this year numbing out. Don't waste it scrolling past your own breakthrough because it's wrapped in discomfort. Fight. Fight for your faith when it would be easier to let it fade. Fight for your family when it is easier to walk away. Fight for your call when the results aren't showing up yet. Fight for God, not because He needs your fight, but because the fight is what's going to forge you into who you were always meant to become. This is only the beginning of what needs to be said. There is more to come, more truth, more fire, more of the fight that's waiting to be unlocked in you. But for now, sit with this. Let it work on you. Let it unsettle the parts of you that have gotten comfortable with giving up, because 2026 is not a year to survive quietly. It's a year to fight loudly, fight faithfully, and fight for God like your life depends on it. Because in more ways than you realize, it does.